and a good afternoon, good evening to you. How the heck are you, George?
I'm good. How are you guys?
Well, you know, we're considering what we saw last night. Did we find out Boston's a lot better than the Mavs? What's your view?
I think Boston's been the best team in the league, but I don't think that they're unbeatable. I've seen a team like Indiana, who was undermanned, basically play 3 out of 4 games incredibly tight against them. I saw a Miami team beat them that was undermanned. I saw a Cleveland team beat them that was undermanned, and not only beat them, but also play them very tight as well in a couple of games, even without Donovan Mitchell. So while I think Boston on paper is better, I don't think that they're some kind of juggernaut that can't be defeated.
What do the Mavs need to do better or different than last night?
Well, let's start with offense. They didn't move the ball very well. I think when you look at them, it felt like they were trying to play bully ball and trying to kind of pick on the matchup with Kristaps Porzingis particularly, and they lost that fight every time, it felt like. So the fact that they only had 9 assists and the season low prior to that was 14 was huge. Luka only had 1 assist. That's not the way the Mavs play ball. It felt like the reverse of what they had been doing all postseason, which was trusting that the guys around Luka and Kyrie would play well. And early on, for the first couple minutes, it looked okay, but then obviously everything kind of cratered after that very quickly. I was encouraged, though, they were able to get themselves back in the game, and they were a couple of easy shots away from cutting that lead even further. I mean, I think it was down to 9 at one point or 8, and Kyrie missed a couple of open threes. They kind of missed a couple of shots at the rim. So I didn't feel like, despite getting blown out the way they did, that this was some sort of mismatch. I do think that Boston has inherent advantages, and I've been saying this all week on ESPN television and radio, and that's Kristaps Porzingis particularly creates a big problem for them, because I don't think that Dallas has someone potentially that can match up with him per se when he's on the offensive side of the ball. And then I thought defensively he lived up to the billing, at least for a game, but can that continue? He's not going to have the adrenaline necessarily that he had going into this one. I mean, they cheered him when he came out of, for warm-ups like he was Willis Reed in the Knicks back in the 70s. Like, it was crazy. So can he continue to play at that level? I got a chance to speak to him after the game, and he was champing at the bit, right, to get out there after the last 37 days. But I am curious to see what that looks like as the series progresses. Can he maintain that level of health?
George, what did you think about Kyrie's performance? We've seen him, and we talked to you during the OKC series, where they had some guys that made things difficult on him from the defensive end. Boston certainly does as well with Drew Holiday. Where are some areas maybe you can see Kyrie improving moving forward, and that Boston did well to make life tough on him last night?
Again, very similar to what I said with Luka, which is also, he's part of this equation too, where it just felt like they were forcing the issue on offense instead of just trusting the offense. I remember being in one of the huddles, and one of the assistant coaches, who will remain nameless, basically said to the guys, they had like these 3 straight possessions where they took really early shots in the shot clock. They were not good shots. And he was yelling at them like, guys, what are we doing here? Like, you guys are just throwing up shots. You're not running the offense. Like, what are we doing? And I feel like there was just a lot of that yesterday. So with Kyrie, I feel like I don't want to say he was pressing because of the crowd. I don't think that was it. I just think Drew Holiday and the Celtics defense did a really good job. In particular, they threw a lot of different looks at both guys, Luka and Kyrie, and I think that they have to kind of figure some of that out. Again, just like I mentioned a moment ago, Kyrie specifically had some really good looks that didn't go down. And especially when the Mavs cut back into that lead and got it into single digits again, I think those are just shots that normally fall for him that didn't fall for him and made the line look even worse for him in the box score.
ESPN's Jorge Sedano in the building last night in Boston for NBA Finals Game 1. What did you make of just the environment in general? We thought it was going to be super hostile towards Kyrie, but you've been in many playoff buildings. How did that compare?
Okay, well, here's the thing, right? So I was in the building when LeBron went back to Cleveland back in 2010. Like, yeah. That is there's nothing that's ever going to compare to that, okay? So that's like a different stratosphere. I would say that this one was pretty good. Like, they were definitely fired up to have him in the building. And early in the game, I would say the first quarter and change, it was really loud in there. And then throughout the game, as things kind of got a little out of control in the first half, I think the crowd kind of settled in, got on their hands a little bit, and just was kind of enjoying, reveling in the big lead. And then in the third quarter, the building got a little tight at times because of the Mavs cutting into the lead. But individually, there were definitely fans, even throughout, giving it to Kyrie. Because, I was seated behind on the second row of the scorer's table. So whenever Kyrie would check in, there was always at least a couple of fans that were giving it to him. And he was having fun with it. He was kind of smiling and whatnot. I remember one guy was telling him, you're a crybaby and, you need to go home. And he kind of laughed. And, he pointed down on the ground. He's like, this is my home. I own, I didn't even say I own it. He just said, I'm right here. I'm right here is what he kept saying. So he definitely had his back and forth with the fans, and they certainly were chanting at him. But I think the initial wave, of pent-up anger and frustration by the Boston fans was probably the thing that stuck out the most, kind of that first quarter and change.
George, we always talk about adjustments and things from game to game, but does Boston really need to do anything differently? Do you expect them to say, okay, well, maybe throw another look, or do you just go back to what you were doing game one? I know KP was knocking down shots, but defensively, do you feel like that there's something else that they're going to try, or revert back to, again, what worked in game one?
So every coach has a different approach to this thing, right? And, I haven't been around Mazzulla enough to know what his thought process is on this stuff. I may have a better idea tomorrow because it's the off day and we'll be there and we'll have a chance to chat with him a little bit. Not that he would reveal government secrets per se, but at least you can kind of glean some stuff off maybe potentially. Mm-hmm. But they're an ultra prepared team. I wouldn't be surprised if they throw in another wrinkle or two to what they did yesterday, because this time of year, this is where coaches really make their money. It's why guys like Eric Spoelstra have gone deep in the playoffs, and Greg Popovich, and those guys have had the success they've had. Steve Kerr. The talent matters, don't get me wrong, but at this level, the talent, it may not be equal, but they're close enough, right? But the coaches can make their hay here in a big way based on the adjustment and the perceived adjustment that the other team is going to make, right? How are you going to adjust based on the way you expect them to adjust? That's the chess match between the coaches. So I am genuinely curious. I don't have a great answer for you on that one, but I am wondering how they're going to play that from the Boston angle. Yeah, I just don't know off the top of my head.
It's Jorge Sedano, ESPN, with you. Theory on why the Mavs are so good in game twos.
I don't know, man. Also, theory on why the Mavs are so bad in game ones, at least twice this postseason, right? So we saw that with the Clippers and OKC. But I just think sometimes, and it's funny because PJ Carlissimo, longtime coach, both in college and the NBA, and then longtime assistant as well in the NBA for Greg Popovich, interestingly enough, who I just mentioned, he's on our broadcast. He's been, our guy on ESPN radio for a number of years. And he talked about it. He's like, look, man, game one, in a lot of people's minds, is a feel-out game. You just kind of roll out there and figure out, not that you don't have a plan, right? But you're just trying to see, okay, what can we do? What can we take away from game one that we can do better in game two? How can we adjust to this? So I think it's just that. I think that, some teams, some coaching staffs, particularly are better counterpunchers. And we're about to find out, if Dallas continues to be a great counterpuncher, because they have been thus far this postseason.
Jorge Sedano with us here in the GBag Nation 105.3 The Fan. One area the Mavericks have been dominant on is the lobs, right? The new lob city, we were calling them here in Dallas. Boston took that away. Is that something you think the Mavericks can get back to, whether it's the pick and roll lobs, the ISO lobs? It was so important for them throughout this run, or is that something they're just not going to get with Boston defensively?
Well, I think that is something that Boston is going to try to take away at all costs. They don't want them to get those easy looks at the rim because it allows them to kind of, I feel like their offense helps generate better stops on defense. First of all, the ball goes through the basket so you can get set on the other side. But the energy, right, the momentum within the game changes because of that flow as well. So I think that was something they were very cognizant of, Boston, to try to eliminate, and they did a good job in Game 1. It doesn't mean you can't find ways to do that. That's on Jason Kidd and company to figure that out. I do think that if you're expecting whatever it was, I think 54 lobs they've had throughout the first couple rounds of the playoffs, I would temper your excitement there because I don't expect Boston to give you as many as you've gotten previously. There's ways to make that happen, and I think that they've got two of the best creators potentially on the floor in Luka and Kyrie to make that happen, and a guy in Jason Kidd who certainly had plenty of that when he was a player. So I think they'll find a way to potentially get more, but it's not going to be easy, that's for sure.
George, would love to get your thoughts on the Dan Hurley, J.J. Redick, Los Angeles Lakers situation.
Well, look, I'm not, embedded in the reporting aspect of it, but I can give you my thoughts on it. Yeah, so I would say this. I think the Lakers did not have an ideal candidate list to work from, right? Because there's not any guy out there that you say, oh, no brainer, that's the guy. You know what I mean? So because of that, there's an inherent risk level with every one of the candidates that were available to them. And I think the way they've assessed it as an organization is who's the person that has the least amount of risk with also a potential high reward. And I think they look at Dan Hurley as that potential prospect. Now, I think Dan Hurley, from an X's and O's standpoint, schematically, is an incredible coach. There's no doubt about that. The stuff he runs for college games is very NBA-like. Some of the stuff that he runs, the motion stuff he does, particularly off ball, the dribble handoff stuff, I mean, that's stuff that I see that immediately, and I see Eric Spoelstra, right, with Bam Adebayo, Duncan Robinson, Tyler Hero, dribble handoffs. Same thing back in the day with Popovich, with, Tim Duncan and Tony Parker and Manu Ginobili. The motion stuff off the ball, very similar to what you see with those two teams and the Warriors, right, with Steve Kerr. So schematically, he's really good. I don't think there's any doubt. And he adapts to his roster really well. And defensively, very similar. He runs a lot of NBA-style schemes. So that part doesn't worry me. What worries me, and I know it's going to sound cliched, is the college coach trying to make the transition to the NBA. Sure. Because in college, you guys know this, you're the sun and everything orbits around you when you're the coach, okay? Right. Whether it's college basketball, college football, that's the reality of it. And that's not going to be the case in the NBA, especially on a team with LeBron James and Anthony Davis, and it's the Los Angeles Lakers, okay? So I think that part, he's a bit feisty, fiery, however you want to call him. I don't know if that's going to play necessarily at the next level, and I think that's the stuff. And I know that there's been chatter about that he understands the game is different and all that stuff, but it's one thing to say that you understand, and then you got to get in the fire, right, and deal with it. And here's a perfect example, okay? When I was a young reporter and talk show host in Miami, I was there when Nick Saban came from LSU to the Dolphins. Mm-hmm. And you guys might remember his first year, they had a pretty solid year. Yep. They went 9-7. Gus Frerotte was his quarterback, I believe, if I recall correctly. Year two, they were going to get a quarterback because they felt like this is the year we were close to getting to the playoffs. We're going to make a push. We're going to get a quarterback. The two quarterbacks that were available were Drew Brees and Dante Culpepper. And the Dolphins doctors told Nick Saban that they felt Culpepper had a better chance of recovering from his knee injury than Brees from his shoulder injury. Infamous last words, clearly, by that staff, right? Yeah. Because they signed Dante Culpepper. We know what happens with Drew Brees over the years. But here's my point. I remember that year at practice, there's a story that's been told and written about Dante Culpepper and Nick Saban allegedly getting into it in their practice bubble. And basically Dante, basically told Nick to kiss off and allegedly said to him, I make more money than you, man. Get the bleep out of here or whatever, So, that's the stuff you deal with. You know what I mean? When you're the college guy coming to the pro level, and it doesn't matter if it's basketball, if it's football, that's some of the stuff you deal with. So, is Dan Hurley ready for the potential LeBron James passive-aggressive swipe? Because we know those are coming. You know what I mean? So, that's the stuff that you can't prepare yourself for.
Okay, I love that you brought up LeBron because I wonder, and you've been around LeBron, how do you think he would feel about the Hurley hiring? Especially, I feel as though he's been the one pushing J.J. Redick a little bit with their relationship on the podcast. And then from a Maverick perspective, I think we're always wondering with how much he's been gushing over Kyrie, we know he loves Luka. Does he exit L.A. and is Dallas a landing spot?
Yeah, I don't think he exits L.A. I think he wants to be rooted in L.A. for the last chapter of his career, and I don't think that's going to happen. I'd be stunned if it did. Okay, I'm not saying it may not happen, but I would absolutely be stunned. As far as what he thinks of him as a coach, I don't know. I know as much as you guys do that apparently, coincidentally, right? J.J. Redick had Dan Hurley on his podcast, Old Man in the Three, and he tweeted a clip out, and LeBron says, "Oh, I love what they do on offense," right? So that's all we know. But if I had to guess, look, man, LeBron is a complicated figure in some ways, okay? In the sense that, and this is just me saying this now, if there was one guy who probably doesn't need a coach that I've ever covered in NBA history, it might be him, because he's probably smarter than every coach that he's had, minus a one or two here or there, right? So I think that plays a factor. The problem is everybody else needs a coach, right? And it's not like, we can do player-coach stuff like Bill Russell back in the day. So I think it's just a challenge, coaching him at times. But there's incredible rewards if you can make it work. Look at Eric Spoelstra. Look at Ty Lue, right? Guys who were able to get across the finish line. Frank Vogel, to a certain extent as well. But the previous two who I mentioned, are still lauded as two of the best in the game at the moment. And they're still that, even despite LeBron. But I will say that when LeBron was with those guys, in the immediacy of it, while they probably all look back at it fondly now, there was probably a lot of tense moments dealing with those LeBron James teams, because those are the stakes, man. If you get in the LeBron James business, it's all high-stakes poker, okay? There is no it's either championship or bust. Even now at 39 years old, there's no other way to determine success. And some people get swallowed up by it, like David Blatt, right? And some people thrive in it, like Eric Spoelstra, who did it twice, and Ty Lue, and Frank Vogel for one season as well. So it's not an easy situation to coach those teams because the pressure is on. And, by the way, now we're throwing in the added, aspect of it also being the Los Angeles Lakers, who will tell you they only play for championships. So them trying to kind of thread this needle with Dan Hurley, where they're talking about bridging, the two eras, the end of the LeBron era and whatever the post-LeBron era rebuild is going to look like, that's a hard needle to thread. And I just don't know if that's something you can do. If they can do it, God bless them. But I just think that's a really hard needle to thread.
Terrific reporting as always, George. We thank you so much for your time, and enjoy the rest of the finals, sir.
You got it, guys. Thanks for having me on. I'll be in your studio, I think, sometime next week. So I'll stop in and say hello.